Richard, we'll get to North Korea in one moment. Give us the very latest on Iran.
Well, Happy New Year. Good morning. In the case of Iran, the context hasn't changed, Joe. I mean, the narrow situation is, yes, people have pulled out of the embassy compound in Iraq. But I actually think it's only a matter of days or at most weeks before the Iraqi parliament votes that we need to leave, that essentially U.S. forces need to leave Iraq, the 5,000 or so that are there. Iraqi nationalism is alive and well. And what we've done is it's no longer turned against Iran so much as turned against us. I think the larger context, though, and it's the only way to understand everything of the last couple of weeks, is the United States is carrying out economic warfare against Iran. And Iran has gone through a series of responses. It attacks tankers, it attacks Saudi Arabian refineries. It's gradually getting out of the 2015 nuclear deal, and now it has its militias attacking U.S. personnel. This dynamic is going to continue, and the risk is obviously we stumble into war. The one thing that continues to be absent from American policy is policy. We seem to be pressuring Iran, but it's not clear what the purpose is. And the issue is there anything Iran can do other than totally change its nature, essentially have regime change? Because that ain't going to happen. Is there anything they could do that could lead to a reduction of the economic pressure that we're putting on them? And this administration simply won't put that on the table. They still seem to be holding out the hope that this Iran regime is either going to disappear or totally change its behavior, and that's simply not in the cards. So there's the absence of real diplomacy here. There's pressure without purpose.
But David Ignatius, the Iran sanctions and President Trump's approach towards Iran, if you view Iran as an existential threat to the United States and want to put pressure on them, it seems at the end of the year to be a success. I mean, Iran's, if we are in fact engaging in economic warfare against Iran, their economy is crushed. Their leaders are feeling the worst heat they felt, I'd say, even beyond going back to 2009. I'd say that this is the greatest threat to the Iranian leadership since they took power in 1979. And it's not just coming from the cosmopolitan elites in Tehran. It's coming from those who supported the regime back in 2009. This is a grave threat, is it not, for the mullahs who have run that country since 79?
Joe, if you measure success in terms of chaos and economic difficulty within Iran, then yes, the Trump administration's maximum pressure policy has been successful. It's created that instability. The Iranians, by most reliable estimates, have killed something like 300 of their own citizens since these protests began November 15. The protests were caused directly by growing economic difficulties in Iran, which were a result of the U.S. sanctions. From the beginning of this U.S. maximum pressure campaign back in 2018, really, the United States' point of vulnerability has been our substantial commitment of American troops in Iraq to train the Iraqi military, to try to keep a measure of stability there. That's always been our exposed weak point. And the Iranians went after it in the last week through their proxies. An attack Friday a week ago that killed an American contractor near Kirkuk. The U.S. reacted the way the Israelis do when they get hit. They had strongly disproportionate reaction. You kill one of ours, we're going to kill 25 of yours. That's what ended up happening when we attacked the base of the Iranian proxy group, Kataib Hezbollah. Those are the people who were at the gates of our embassy in the last few days, and it was a scary confrontation to look at.
I was going to ask, I was going to ask both you and Richard, because Richard had talked about Iraqi nationalism rising. This isn't Iraqi nationalism, is it, Richard? And then I'll go to you, David, as well. This isn't Iraqi nationalism. These are proxies for Iran that were at the gate. I mean, the Iranian regime is desperate, so what do? They send drones to blow up Saudi oil fields, and they send their proxies to invade the U.S. embassy. This doesn't have anything to do with Iraqi nationalism, does it? This is a desperate Iranian regime.
Two things, Joe. I'll start the new year by disagreeing with you. I don't think the Iranian regime is desperate. I think it's a mistake to underestimate the resilience of this regime. Are they hurting? Yes. Are the sanctions hurting? Yes. But is this regime in serious jeopardy? Absolutely not, I would say. So I don't think we should underestimate it. Second of all, Iraqi nationalism was manifesting itself over the last couple of weeks and months against Iran. You had the burning down of Iranian consulates. You had people coming out against Iranian influence. What the last couple of days have done is switch things. It was understandable that we responded to the militia strike. What was not understandable or wise was why we necessarily responded within Iraq. What it did was put in jeopardy the U.S. diplomatic and military presence in Iraq. So I think there is Iraqi nationalism. I'm not arguing with your basic point that the people at the gates of the embassy compound are Iranian militia people. That's being orchestrated. But that changed the scenario. And I think, we just didn't think through the likely sequence of results from what would happen if the United States responded inside Iraq itself.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.